Hi, Sue Borison from Your Teen Media. I'm here with Judith Warner, the author of And Then They Stopped Talking to Me, Making Sense of Middle School, and many other books. And most recently, she wrote an article for Time magazine that is so on point about parents of middle schoolers having it rougher than other parents. So I really just wanted to talk to you about middle school. And so I wanted to start with what prompted you to write that book.
It was the process of going through middle school again, going through it an extra 2 times because I have 2 kids, and just finding it so incredibly hard, bizarrely difficult, with a lot of emotion coming up for me. And the emotion was overmuch. And I thought, there's something not quite right about this. Something is being triggered. And I noticed that other parents around me, who by that point I'd known for quite a while, just seemed pretty unhappy. Their faces were kind of shutting down. The atmosphere was getting a little bit poisonous. And I found myself just thinking, and I actually found an email where I said this the other day when I was getting some stuff together for the book. I wonder who the 12-year-olds are who are walking around inside of us. That was really the impetus for the book. Now, it didn't come together for a few years after that, but that was the kernel of the question that I was asking myself and wanted to know.
So you have 2 girls.
Yep.
Was it easier with the second one?
Yes, it was easier with the second one, but they're very different people. So I think it was just easier. It was easier for her than it was for the first. I think in some ways it may have been harder for me because I was kind of preconditioned from having had a hard time the first time around and maybe was more reactive as a result. I'm not sure. I also think though the second time around I was sort of getting into an observational mode, the way you do when you're thinking about writing about something, or when you're starting to actually experience yourself experiencing something instead of being completely caught up in it. So I was observing in a different way, and I was more aware of what I was feeling and what other people were saying and doing.
So you say it's because you were looking for toward writing a book about it, but I also had the same experience because I felt less surprised by it. So I could be more mindful and anticipate what I wanted to be in that story, as opposed to the first time when I felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath me. So one of the things that we've always set out to do in Your Teen, and we don't actually know if it's possible, but can you avoid having a firstborn, in the sense of, if you were to read all of your books and all of our content, could you come into middle school with a different sense of preparedness and like less shock when someone didn't invite your kid to the party?
Yes, I think you definitely could. For one thing, I think that you could come in with a little bit more of an anthropological attitude. Now, maybe that's me and that's my defense mechanism. I don't know, but I find that if I can kind of be abstracted from a situation in a certain sense, that I can witness it and look at it, observe it, and think about it without necessarily getting emotionally triggered. And I think that that really is what parents need on so many levels when it comes to the middle school moment, because it is really triggering for them. It triggers old memories, it triggers old feelings about themselves. What's going on with their kids triggers, you said, the kind of anxiety that you were describing when your kids left home. I think a lot of parents experience when their kids hit middle school, because they start to pull back. So that if their kids have really, and for all of us it's true, they've been the center of your universe for so long, and then they start to be critical or rejecting, or just to be sort of, more in their own world. I think a lot of parents can experience that with a lot of anxiety or feeling, kind of abandoned. But when those feelings are just murky and swirling around and you're not in touch with them, you just feel miserable. You don't know why. So I think having the preparation of knowing that the middle school moment is really hard for parents. So there's so much to learn about this time and why it's hard, what exactly kids are going through developmentally, what parents are going through developmentally, because it is a developmental stage for parents as well, independently of their kids. By and large, that's when we're entering early middle age, which is not easy. So there are all these different forces operating at the same time. For me, doing this research, talking to people, talking to experts, and then reading everything I could get my hands on, it changed the eyes through which I view not just middle schoolers and their social interactions, but all people's social interactions.
So I wanted to read a quote of yours because this is why we started Your Teen Media 13 years ago. And we've never said it quite as poignantly as you did. For many parents, there's a new kind of aloneness too. Whereas earlier they might have bonded over no sleep horror stories, sometime around when the kids turn 11, a sense of discretion kicks in. Parents say it's about protecting the privacy of their almost adolescent children, yet their inconsistent decisions about what's deemed private often seem aimed at hiding what they themselves feel will make their kids lose face, above all in the eyes of other parents. So I think that's so profound. And how did you kind of get to the point of having that aha moment?
Of being able to articulate that?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, I wrote that a couple of weeks ago and started to experience this, a decade ago or a little over a decade ago. So I think it took, sitting with it for a long time and doing the research for the book, because once again, what's boiled down in that sentence, I think, is kind of the essence of what I was experiencing and what a lot of other parents were experiencing, and what kept all of us kind of isolated in our own problems, not realizing that other people were experiencing a lot of the same things, and also unable to get help either from one another or just in general, because we couldn't name it. And I think that when you can name what's going on, then you can do something about it, even if it's just to laugh about it or roll your eyes about it or talk about it like we're talking about it. But it just brings so much comfort. And that face-saving stuff that kicks in is so toxic. And what's weird about it is it's the adult version of the same thing that's going on with the kids, right? Kids that age are trying to figure out who they are and where they rank, and they're obsessed with status and hierarchy. In the form of popularity, and parents are too. So, and people always have been, that's human. But because of the way we parent now, because we tend to be so present in our children's lives, and presence is a good thing, but enmeshment is not. So when you get that kind of parent-child enmeshment around social stuff, it triggers everybody's social anxieties and everybody's worst instincts and worst behavior.
So we'd call it FOMO now for a lot of these social moments, fear of missing out. Do you think it's worse for the kids or the parents?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think the kids potentially get over it faster than the parents do. I think the parents have a tendency to bear grudges for a very long time. And I also think, if parents dialed all of that down, the kids would get over it a whole lot faster, because parents often keep it going by coming back to it. What happened with this? Did you get invited with that? What's your plan this weekend? And that just drives home the message to kids over and over again. It's a really big deal and a bad thing if you're not getting invited to XYZ. It's not helpful at all.
All right, now we're in this situation where everything is exacerbated, and parents are expected to do extraordinary things right now. I think that something you said will comfort parents of middle schoolers, that they have to be everything and do everything for a group of kids who want nothing to do with us. So here we are in this position where the schools are doing their best. The teachers and the schools are trying so hard. The parents often are working, have other kids, all of these competing interests. And when you find time to go to that middle schooler and help them, they don't want help. They don't want you.
Right.
So how do you deal with that?
As we were saying before we started, when we were just chatting, I feel so bad for middle school parents right now. I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know how I would have done it. I am so glad that my kids are adults now and they're home, but I don't have to worry about whether or not they're doing what they should be doing. I do worry about it, but I can let myself off the hook to not worry about it, because I can say to myself, well, as the mother of adult children, it's on them. Getting kids to do things they don't want to do under the best of circumstances is tough. Getting them to do it under these circumstances where everybody is off, we are all off. We're all really anxious. We're all not sleeping. Our bodies are off. Our sleep is disturbed. Everything about life right now is off. And Some school systems are easing up on the pressure on kids, the academic pressure, and that's fantastic. And some are doubling down. I think that's terrible. I think it's sadistic toward parents. I really do. To have them be trying to earn a living, taking care of multiple kids, and at the same time having to oversee homework, it's too much. And especially, I always feel for the parents who have kids with learning issues or ADHD or other sorts of mental health issues, all of which is exacerbated right now, and all of which they're having to handle on their own. And they can't. That is not humanly possible. And I think they need to say that to themselves. I will do the best I can. I'm not going to do what's impossible. And I think that schools are going to have to sort of let them off the hook and pick up the slack some way in the fall. Maybe the whole curriculum doesn't get done. Maybe some of it is going to be redone. But there has to be a kind of, we're all in it together, and not some people ramping up to get their kids further ahead while others fall further behind.
There has to be a forgiveness factor, because it's just not doable.
It's not doable. It's not doable. In this country, we're always asking parents to do the impossible and then blaming them, or then, they blame themselves if they can't do the impossible. And that's awful. And we have to make it stop.
So your perspective of middle schoolers is joyful. Like, you have a lot of wonderful things about kids in middle school. And it would be great if, as parents, we could see that in our kids on a regular basis. But then there's this moment when they hate us, and it feels like such a betrayal. So, like, we have these glorious moments, and especially now in if you're in quarantine still, like, there are these really spectacular moments that families are having, but middle school kids in particular can turn on a dime. How do you navigate, like, the kind of your whole heart's in and then your whole heart is broken?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say my perspective is, glorious, that I think it's a wonderful moment. I think I've been trying to counter the stereotype that it is a sheerly horrible moment and that they're sociopathic monsters. That we know is not true. Educators who work with these kids say that they have all kinds of untapped strengths, and that's true too. And I think that often when we dig back into our memories, we tend to only hold on to the really awful social things that happened. But I happened to find something I had written when I was in 8th grade that reminded me of everything else that was in my life too, that I sort of forgotten about. How much I loved reading, how serious I was already about writing, that so many of the ambitions that stayed with me for the rest of my life were there and in place, and how much I love my best friend. We have to remember that those good things are there too, and then encourage them, because those are the things that make our lives easier with them, but also that bring them joy. Because a lot of the time, the social stuff that consumes them takes up so much room in their brain, and that often we associate exclusively with the age, are the things that bring unhappiness. So I guess I'm kind of trying to walk that line with parents to say, sometimes you create what you expect. And so if you can maybe broaden your expectation of what you'll see, then you'll find a happier situation. And in terms of the way they behave toward you, it's just normal. It's just the process they go through. It's what they have to go through. They're starting to become themselves. They're figuring out how to separate from you. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do with any kind of, I don't know, gracefulness. Everyone's kind of muddling along. And I think all that parents can do is not take it personally, and try to have a sense of humor about it to the extent to which it's possible, not making fun of the kids, because that would backfire completely. But again, at least in their own minds, to be able to think about what's going on with them and how it's normal. It's not pathological, and it's also not a sign that they've failed as parents. And there's so much great research. There's so much to read about this. And I've really tried in the book to pull it all together in a way, where you don't have to wade through thousands of articles. Here's a narrative that'll bring out what's most interesting for you. And again, I just found it so helpful, even though for me it was long after the fact, because a lot of the messages and the lessons about understanding that period of life better really carry over to every period with kids of all ages, but also into adulthood too. And in terms of kind of how we think about ourselves and relate to our friends and all of it. So I think that's the way parents can get through all of this with a little bit more equanimity.
I think it's so comforting to hear that this is important for our kids to go through, that that's a self-defining stage of life and it's important. Then, and universal, right? Like we can know that we're not suffering alone, that it's common and it's good.
And what's really universal too, interestingly, is how different the experience is for different kids. I think that parents often worry that their kid is either too mature or too immature, words that carry a lot of judgment, and that we ought to get rid of. Because one thing that's been known about this age for a really long time is that there's enormous variability in terms of what's normal. How quickly kids mature, how when they go through puberty, and when all sorts of other things then fall into place cognitively, emotionally. They don't all go through it at exactly the same time. And it's fine. And that's why you have some kids who, in seventh grade might look 9 and others who look 15. It isn't that anyone at either end of that extreme is necessarily somehow pathological or deviating from the norm. We've got to widen our acceptance of what's okay at that age to take all of that in so that kids themselves maybe can accept themselves more.
All right, that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Judith Warner, author of And Then They Stopped Talking to Me, Making Sense of Middle School. Thanks so much for hanging with us.
Well, thank you so much for such a great interview.